Only a fool fixes cars for free for those old soldiers. A neighbor sneered. The mechanic didn't respond. Just tighten the last bolt. 6 weeks later, the Secretary of Defense appeared outside his shop with a camera crew. What kind of miracle did this silent kindness create? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Caleb Morgan wiped grease from his weathered hands as he surveyed his small auto shop. At 44, the lines around his eyes had deepened from years squinting at engines in the Arizona sun. His Mesa Ridge garage wasn't fancy. Just 3 bays, basic equipment and a small waiting area with coffee that was usually too strong. But it was his. After 12 years as a Navy mechanic, this shop represented everything he'd worked toward. A faded picture hung beside the cash register. Caleb's father in dress blues, stern-faced but proud. Chief Petty Officer James Morgan had died during a 1978 mission. When Caleb was barely 3, Caleb had followed in his footsteps, enlisting after high school, serving on aircraft carriers until a knee injury sent him back to civilian life. Now Caleb ran Morgan Auto with quiet efficiency. He rarely spoke about his service, but other veterans recognized the military precision in how he organized his tools. The way he stood slightly at attention when the national anthem played on his small radio. One Tuesday afternoon, an elderly man in a battered Chevrolet pulled into the lot. Caleb noticed the veteran's license plate immediately. Vietnam era. Marine Corps. The man introducing himself as Eugene Sparks explained his transmission was slipping badly. Don't have much saved this month, Frank said, eyes downcast. Social security check doesn't stretch far these days. Maybe you could just check what's wrong and I'll come back when I can afford it. Caleb examined the car, finding the transmission needed significant work. The bill would run over $1,200, money Frank clearly didn't have. Without comment, Caleb began disassembling the transmission. 6 hours later, when Frank returned, Caleb simply handed him the keys. All set, he said. What do I owe you? Frank asked, reaching for his worn wallet. Caleb shook his head. No charge for veterans. Thank you for your service. Frank's eyes welled up. Son, I can't accept that, it must have been hours of work. You already paid, Caleb replied quietly. A long time ago. That night, Caleb created a small handwritten sign and placed it by the reception desk. Veterans, no charge. Thank you for your service. Word spread quickly through Mesa Ridge's veteran community. Soon, former service members began appearing with various automotive problems. Some minor, others requiring days of work. Caleb handled each one without complaint, often staying late into the evening. Not everyone appreciated Caleb's policy. Vin Doyle, who owned the auto shop 3 blocks away, started telling customers, Morgan's just doing it for publicity. Nobody works for free unless they're getting something out of it. Caleb's neighbor Alan Knox laughed outright when he heard about the free repairs. Only a fool fixes cars for free for those old soldiers. They already get government benefits. You're just being played, Morgan. Even Caleb's brother-in-law during Sunday dinner voiced concern. Caleb, you've got Julia and the kids to think about. This generosity is going to bankrupt you. Caleb just smiled, passing the mashed potatoes. I owe those men and women more than they'll ever owe me. As weeks passed, Caleb's accountant pointed out the obvious. The free work was cutting significantly into his profits. Some months, he barely broke even. Maybe limited to 1 day a week, the accountant suggested. Caleb considered this briefly before shaking his head. Some debts can't be repaid on a schedule, he said. The kind ones often pay the highest price, but sometimes it's the only road they know to travel. Stay with us to discover what happens next to Caleb. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, an old Ford F-150 pickup, with faded blue paint and rust around the wheel wells, pulled into Morgan Auto. The driver, a man in his 60s with silver hair and military posture, introduced himself as Ray Navarro. He moved with noticeable stiffness, his right arm bearing a long scar from wrist to elbow. Transmission's making a noise, Ray explained, his voice gravely. Heard you might be able to help. Caleb nodded, noticing the veteran's cap Ray wore. Let me take a look. As Ray signed the paperwork, Caleb spotted his military ID peeking from his wallet. Old but still kept carefully in a plastic sleeve. The glimpse was brief, but Caleb recognized insignia indicating service in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Unusual for someone Ray's age. I'll need it by Monday if possible, Ray said. Still works security 3 nights a week. Caleb assured him the truck would be ready. After Ray left, Caleb discovered the transmission problem was severe. A complete rebuild job, requiring parts that weren't cheap. Nevertheless, he ordered everything overnight and began working. When Ray returned Monday morning, the truck was ready. Like others before him, he tried to pay, and like others, Caleb refused. "Your money's no good here, sir," Caleb said, handing over the keys. Ray studied Caleb for a long moment. "You Navy?" he asked. 12 years. "Aircraft mechanic." Ray nodded, then reached into his pocket and placed something on Caleb's desk. A challenge coin, the kind service members exchange as tokens of respect. This one bore the insignia of a special operations unit. "You don't know what you've touched here," Ray said quietly before driving away. That same week, whispers began circulating throughout Mesa Ridge. Vin Doyle from the competing garage started telling customers that Caleb was using veterans as a marketing ploy. "He fixes their cars for free, then overcharges everyone else to make up for it," Rick claimed, though Caleb's prices remained among the fairest in town. A local business reviewer questioned Caleb's motives online. "Is Morgan exploiting patriotism for profit? Sources say his charity work is just a cover for tax write-offs." Caleb ignored the chatter, but its effect was undeniable. Several regular customers stopped coming. At the hardware store, conversations stopped when Caleb entered. At his son's baseball game, some parents shifted away when he sat in the bleachers. "Self-proclaimed hero," one father muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Julia, Caleb's wife of 15 years, began collecting the mail before Caleb could see it, intercepting the occasional anonymous note, calling him a fake patriot, or suggesting his military service had been exaggerated. "Maybe take down the sign for a while," Julia suggested, one night as they sat at their kitchen table, reviewing bills. "Just until this blows over." Caleb shook his head. That would be saying they're right. The financial strain grew worse. Caleb had to let go of his part-time help. Then he started selling off some of his specialized tools to make rent on the shop. He took out a second mortgage on their modest home, but told Julia it was just a refinance to get a better rate. One evening, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Ray Navarro. "You don't know whose heart you've touched. Just keep going." The cryptic message puzzled Caleb. A week later, he received a call from a blocked number with a Washington, D.C. area code. When he answered, there was a pause, then a brief message. "Keep doing what you do, we're watching." The caller hung up before Caleb could respond. These strange communications might have given Caleb hope, but they were overshadowed by escalating hostility. One morning, he arrived at the shop to find the window shattered, red spray paint across the remaining glass. "Fake hero." Julia begged him to call the police, but Caleb refused. "Filing a report won't change minds," he said, sweeping up glass. He reopened the next day as if nothing had happened. The vandalism, however, seemed to mark a turning point. Longtime customers who had drifted away began returning, some apologizing for their absence. A few veterans organized a weekend gathering at the shop, bringing coffee and donuts, helping Caleb replace the window. But these small kindnesses couldn't offset the financial damage. Caleb checked his accounts late one night, calculating that he had perhaps 2 months before he would need to close the shop permanently. He hadn't told Julia yet, couldn't bring himself to admit that their life savings had been depleted, that their future had been sacrificed for his principle. As he locked up that evening, Caleb paused by Ray's truck, which had returned with another issue, a fuel pump problem Caleb hadn't had time to address. He ran his hand along the faded hood, wondering if he was indeed a fool. "Maybe they're right," he whispered to the empty shop. "If you still believe that small actions can change the entire world, type HOPE. He needed to start planning how to sell the equipment, how to tell his employees they would soon be without jobs, how to explain to Julia that their retirement savings were gone. The coffee maker sputtered as Caleb stared at the books, the numbers refusing to transform no matter how many times he recalculated. Outside, Mesa Ridge was waking up, the donut shop across the street raising its security gate, the morning rush beginning at the intersection. Caleb had just closed his ledger when he noticed the first black SUV. It pulled into his lot slowly, tinted windows revealing nothing about its occupants. Then another identical vehicle appeared, then a third. Within minutes, 6 government-style SUVs had parked in a semicircle around his modest shop. Men in dark suits emerged, some speaking into earpieces. One approached the shop door, knocking firmly despite the open sign clearly displayed. "Caleb Morgan?" the man asked when Caleb opened the door. "Yes," Caleb replied, a knot forming in his stomach. Was this about taxes? Had someone reported him for something? "Please step outside, sir. There's someone who wants to meet you." Heart pounding, Caleb followed the agent into the morning sunlight. A small crowd had already gathered on the sidewalk. Across the street, the McDonald's drive-thru had ground to a halt, as customers and employees alike stared at the scene unfolding. A television crew was setting up cameras. A woman with a press badge directed lighting technicians. More vehicles arrived, these with military marking. "What's happening?" Caleb asked, but his question died as the crowd suddenly parted. A distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit approached, flanked by military officers. Caleb recognized him immediately from news broadcasts and military briefings. The Secretary of Defense, the civilian head of the entire United States military. The secretary extended his hand. "Mr. Morgan, it's an honor to meet you." Caleb shook the offered hand, automatically, words failing him. "America needs more citizens like you," the secretary continued, his voice carrying to the now silent crowd. "People who don't need to be asked, people who simply act when they see a need." The secretary motioned and an aide stepped forward with a small wooden box. "On behalf of the Department of Defense and a grateful nation, I'm here to present you with a Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest honor we can bestow upon a civilian." Caleb stared at the medal inside the box, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Sir, I don't understand," he managed. The secretary smiled. "3 months ago, you repaired a vehicle belonging to Ray Navarro. What you couldn't have known is that Ray served in special operations for over 30 years, including missions so classified they'll remain redacted for decades." From behind the secretary, Ray himself emerged, standing straighter than Caleb had seen before, now dressed in a suit with military decorations visible on his lapel. "The coin I gave you," Ray explained, "is only awarded to those who've earned the highest respect from special operations personnel. I gave it to you because what you did matters more than you know." The secretary nodded. "Ray's brothers served with your father on the USS Constellation in 19. They were together on the mission where your father was lost." Caleb felt his knees weaken. "My father. You knew my father?" Ray's eyes softened. "James Morgan saved my brother's life during that mission. When I realized who you were, when I saw your father's picture in your shop, I knew why you were helping veterans. You were finishing what your father started. But there's more," the secretary continued. "The work you've been doing, fixing vehicles for veterans without charge, has allowed many of them to get to medical appointments, job interviews, family reunions. You've changed lives, Mr. Morgan." From the crowd, a man in his 70s stepped forward. "My granddaughter's graduation," he said, "wouldn't have made it without you fixing my car." A woman raised her hand. "My husband's VA treatments. 3 years cancer-free now." One by one, veterans and family members called out the moments Caleb's generosity had made possible. The secretary raised his hands for quiet. "When Ray reported what you were doing, we investigated. We found over 200 veterans whose lives were directly improved by your work. That challenge coin Ray gave you, it made its way to my desk, along with a recommendation for this award." Caleb looked around at the faces watching him, some neighbors who had avoided him, others who had stood by him, many he didn't recognize at all. "I just fixed cars," he said simply. "You did much more than that," the secretary replied. "You showed that the covenant between this nation and those who defend it is not just a government responsibility, it's a sacred trust we all share." The ceremony continued with formal presentations and speeches. The Department of Defense announced a new program, inspired by Caleb's example, to support auto repair services for veterans nationwide. A major auto parts supplier pledged to cover Caleb's expenses for veteran repairs for the next 5 years. Vin Doyle, the competing mechanic who had spread rumors, approached awkwardly as the crowd began to disperse. "Morgan, I was wrong," he admitted, unable to meet Caleb's gaze. Other neighbors who had shunned Caleb now pressed forward, eager to shake his hand or claim long-standing friendship. Someone had hastily created a sign reading, "Home of the Brave," and planted it by Caleb's shop entrance. Reporters swarmed, asking how it felt to be recognized at such a high level. Caleb considered his answer carefully before responding. "I'm just a mechanic who tightens bolts," he said. "The real honor belongs to the men and women who wore the uniform." As cameras flashed and the secretary prepared to leave, Ray pulled Caleb aside. "Your father would be proud," he said, "not of the medal or the attention, but because you understood the most important lesson he lived by." "What's that?" Caleb asked. "That true service doesn't stop when you take off the uniform," Ray replied. "It's a lifetime commitment. If you believe that genuine kindness always finds its way back, type justice." In the months following the secretary's visit, Caleb Morgan's life transformed in ways he never imagined. yet in other ways remained steadfastly the same. Major auto manufacturers offered him dealership opportunities. Television producers pitched reality show concepts featuring his work. Investment groups suggested franchising Morgan Veterans Auto across the country. Caleb declined them all with the same quiet courtesy he had always shown. "I'm not interested in being famous," he told Julia as they sat on their porch swing one evening. "I just want to fix cars and keep my promise." The promise unspoken, but understood to honor his father's memory, through service rather than words. Caleb did accept some changes. A non-profit foundation was established to support his work, allowing donations to cover parts and materials for veterans' vehicles. 2 additional mechanics were hired, both veterans themselves, who had struggled to find employment. Caleb instituted a training program, teaching automotive skills to young veterans, transitioning to civilian life. "Learning a trade saved me," Caleb explained to his first class of 5 former service members. "Having something to fix, something to make right, it grounds you when everything else feels uncertain." The shop itself remained largely unchanged. The handwritten Veterans No Charge sign was professionally framed and hung in its original position by the reception desk. Caleb refused to replace it with anything more elaborate, believing its simplicity carried more meaning than any polished plaque. Ray Navarro's old Ford pickup found a permanent home in the corner of the shop. Caleb had restored it completely, its faded blue paint now gleaming, an American flag permanently mounted on its hood. It served as both monument and teaching tool. Each new veteran trainee learned automotive basics by working on different aspects of the truck. This vehicle connected 2 generations of service. Caleb would explain, "It reminds us that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves." In Mesa Ridge, attitudes had shifted dramatically. Those who had once mocked Caleb's generosity now pointed out his shop to visitors with pride. The vandals who had broken his window anonymously delivered a handwritten apology along with a donation to the foundation. One Wednesday afternoon, a young Marine recently returned from overseas sat in Caleb's waiting area, watching him work. The young man had been silent during his oil change, but as Caleb wiped his hands and presented the keys, he finally spoke. "The day I lost faith in everything," he said quietly, "was the day my truck broke down. I couldn't afford repairs, couldn't get to therapy appointments, couldn't visit my kid." He looked up at Caleb. "Then someone told me about this place. You didn't just fix my trucks, you fixed something inside me, reminded me that good people still exist." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of those words more than the young Marine could know. As the shop's reputation grew, journalists occasionally asked Caleb for his philosophy. Why did he continue working in the same small shop when he could expand? Why maintain his hands-on approach when he could easily move into management? "Kindness doesn't need cameras," Caleb would reply, "it just needs a hand reached out at the right moment." On the anniversary of the secretary's visit, the local paper ran a feature about Morgan Auto's impact on the community. The final paragraph quoted a veteran whose car Caleb had repaired years earlier, before any recognition came his way. "Sometimes an act that no one notices saves an entire generation of faith. Morgan didn't fix my car for fame. He did it because that's who he is, the kind of American who reminds us who we're supposed to be." Later that week, Caleb stood quietly beside Ray Navarro's restored truck, brushing dust from the hood. The reflection staring back wasn't of a hero, but of a man who had simply kept a promise. It wasn't the cameras or ceremonies that changed lives, it was the grit between his fingers and the choice to show up, again and again when it mattered most. As I've written Caleb Morgan's story over these past few days, I keep asking myself, what if he had chosen silence? What if he had played it safe, turned away that first veteran, kept his head down and just run his business like everyone expected? We would have lost a story that desperately needs telling. In a world that seems increasingly divided, Caleb reminded us that some bonds transcend politics, transcend opinions, transcend the noise of daily conflict. The bond between civilians and those who serve, it's not about agreeing with every military action or policy decision. It's about recognizing the human being who stood ready when called. Caleb Morgan never served in combat, never fired a shot in defense of his nation, but he understood something profound about service, that it takes many forms, that we all have something to contribute to this covenant we share as Americans. What strikes me most about Caleb's story isn't the moment of recognition when cameras arrived and officials made speeches. It's the 3 years before that moment, the quiet Tuesday afternoons when he stayed late rebuilding a transmission for someone who couldn't pay, the Saturdays he missed his son's baseball games to finish a repair for a veteran who needed to get to a medical appointment,
The nights he calculated bills at his kitchen table, wondering how he would make payroll that month. I wonder how many Caleb Morgans exist in our communities right now. People whose quiet acts of decency go unnoticed and uncelebrated. The retired teacher who tutors struggling students for free. The nurse who sits with the dying when their families can't be present. The farmer who anonymously leaves produce at the food bank. The countless hands that reach out when cameras aren't rolling. Has someone in your life ever helped you without expecting anything in return? Someone who showed up at exactly the right moment, offering exactly what you need, whether it was practical assistance, emotional support, or simply the gift of their presence. Think about them today, remember their face, their voice, their actions. The world is full of headlines about humanity's failures. But these quiet heroes write a different story with their lives, a story of who we can be at our best. There are people whose names will never appear in history books. There are acts of kindness that will never trend on social media or receive official recognition. But because of these people and their actions, our world remains a place of hope rather than despair. The next time you see someone struggling, remember Caleb Morgan. Remember that sometimes the most important contribution we can make isn't grand or dramatic. It's simply showing up using whatever skills we have and saying without words, "You are not alone in this." Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories where everyday heroes are never forgotten. Type remember if you've ever known someone like Caleb, or if you've ever been that person yourself, quietly helping without seeking recognition. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.